everyone, welcome back to the channel. My name is Alex and this is the Lily Library. So like a mermaid leaving the depths of the ocean to breach the surface, I have returned in October to give you my summer reading wrap up. Obviously would have loved to make it earlier, but we're just gonna blame the state of the world today, and I think that I need no further explanation. I'm fully aware that there's a good possibility no one will want to watch this video because why are we talking about summer books in October? But I wanted to talk about these books because I had a lot to say, and I know if I wait until next year, I will forget everything. So we're here, and luckily for you, I love to read summer horror books. So I do have two that could be applicable to the spooky season, but I also have just some straight summer books that I'm going to be talking about. So I'm gonna start with my favorite book and my least favorite book that I read at the beginning of the summer. And then for the rest of the books that I read, they're gonna be in the order of how much I had to say about them. So the ones that I'm feeling pretty indifferent about, they're gonna be at the end. Let's start with my favorite book that I read at the beginning of the summer. And that book is When the Reckoning Comes by LaTanya McQueen. This story follows Mira, and in Mira's childhood, she experienced a kind of tragic event that tore her life and her childhood friendship apart. And this caused her to flee her hometown, never to return. But she receives an invite to one of her childhood friends' wedding, and she feels compelled to return for it. Now, this wedding is going to take place at the Woodsman Plantation, which is a very eerie and rumored to be haunted place, but it has been transformed into this lush resort. And when Mira returns, she comes face to face with not only the issues of her past, but of her ancestors' past as well. I adored this book. Not only was it incredibly entertaining and spooky, it had something to say. This is a ghost story, but really it is a story about how these ghosts are a metaphor for how we are tethered to our past and our history. How the echoes of slavery can be seen in America's present day caste system, and how systemic racism exists, whether you want to believe it or not. McQueen does a fantastic job kind of weaving this all together through Mira's narrative, but also these little vignettes of the slaves' experiences in their eyes, from their point of view. And those vignettes are so beautifully written. They were horrific and haunting, and I think that that's the effect she was going for. Sometimes the ghosts of the story aren't the scariest thing that you will face as a reader. I'm trying to talk about this book without giving too much away, with giving you these very broad ideas, because you should be able to experience all of the revelations kind of with Mira. But I will say, I loved these characters. They were so informed and shaped by their experiences, and they felt so real. One character in particular I thought was so well done, and that was Celine. Now, in Mira's friend group, she has Celine and Jessie. Her and Jessie are Black and Celine is white. Jessie has a line about Celine that I think perfectly encapsulates the purpose of her character, and that line is, "It's like the difference between drowning someone and not caring if someone drowns nearby. In both scenarios, someone ends up dead." And I think that is a beautiful way to illustrate how Celine's character is this symbol of white incompetence and complacency when it comes to standing up against injustice. What makes her character so fascinating is that she is so beloved by her friends. And she is not an inherently bad person. She's actually quite a sweet person. But when confronted with an opportunity to stand up for her friends, she cowers. Now, she is also a product of her past, which you can take into account. However, it does not excuse her inaction. And that is something that I think white people really need to take in on a deep level. I highly recommend this. This is actually a fantastic October read, but it is very heavy. It was a lot heavier than I anticipated, but I really, really loved it. Now let's talk about a book that I did not love. And that book is Fantasticland, and it is by Mike Bakoven. I also want to say before starting this review that I have been on the hunt for a good horror thriller that takes place in an amusement park for some time. In 2002, I read Hide by Kirsten White. That was okay. Last year, I read Fierce Kingdom by Jen Phillips. It took place in a zoo, but it had the thriller vibes. That was also okay. Really wanted Fantasticland to blow me away. Unfortunately, it did not. This is about a group of amusement park employees who get trapped in said amusement park due to a devastating hurricane. 5 weeks later, when a rescue team finally arrives, they find a massacre has taken place. And the amusement park is just full of this horrific carnage. And so this is a story about what happened, and it is told through a series of interviews, which is becoming my least favorite way to tell a story after reading Sleeping Giants. As a whole, like, it's not terrible. The concept of it, the execution, like, it's not the worst thing I've ever read, but I truly have a problem with what this book is trying to say. It is about how young people in the age of technology are just one disaster away from becoming sociopaths. I do agree with the idea that violence can radicalize people quickly. But what happens in this book to make all of these teenagers just so violent is like purely nonsensical. What makes it worse is that the author emphasizes multiple times that these kids have all of the resources available to them. He emphasizes also that they are all like young adults, okay? They have all the resources available to them. They're not gonna starve. They have systems in place. And yet they so immediately, within one day, just turn to like complete anarchy. There is a charged energy in this writing that is giving boomer, okay? It's giving these young people today with their technology, they couldn't survive in this world. When like Gen Z are some of the most empathetic and understanding and communicative people that have ever existed, like in our world. And it's like, what are we talking about here? Like, what are we talking about? Another criticism that I have is there actually is a group of adults who are kind of like maintenance guys, and they just like dip out at the beginning of the book because they're like, you know what? These kids, they're gonna all kill each other, which is really irresponsible. And quite frankly, like, why aren't we looking at these guys who were the adults in the situation who just dipped out? In my experience, older people have usually been the ones to abuse power in situations. So, I mean, just an observation. But my takeaway is that, you know, instead of really shining the light on the issues we have in our society, this really felt like, okay, young people, you're the problem. Like, you're so addicted to technology. I don't know. I didn't love it. Not Lord of the Flies, okay? Y'all gotta stop with these comparisons. The next book that I'm going to talk about is Chesapeake Requiem, A Year with the Watermen of the Vanishing Tangier Island, and this is by Earl Swift. Earl Swift is a journalist, and he wrote this book about his experiences with the people of Tangier over the 2 years that he stayed there. Tangier Island is a remote island that is located in America's largest estuary, which is the Chesapeake Bay. It has a small but tight community that is 240 years old that consists of these crab fishermen. This community is ruled by tradition, but they are having to face this very modern issue to them, which is climate change. Tangier has lost 2/3 of its land since 1850 due to glacial isostatic adjustment. This is the movement of land in response to the ice sheets and glaciers melting. Tangier men do not believe this is happening. They think that this erosion is caused by wind-driven waves solely, and that this erosion, which is what they commonly refer to it as, is just happening and it's not accelerating due to climate change. So this book, it just follows their day-to-day life, their opinions, their ideas. It really serves as a microcosm for American conservative ideology around climate change and the climate crisis. These people are so driven by the idea of maintaining their traditional lifestyle that they don't realize, I mean, they do realize, but they just can't come to terms with the fact that the world has changed around them. It has progressed, both positively and negatively, one of those negative effects being the climate crisis. And as a society, we have to evolve. And if we don't evolve, we will end up like Tangier and we will be erased. I mean, that is the reality of what will happen to their island probably within the next 100 years. The author talks about something really fantastic in this book as well, which I think is very relevant to today. And that is kind of the idea of when these weather patterns get more intense and we see these disasters happening more frequently, like what communities are going to be saved? You know, is Tangier on the top of the government's list of places that they're going to need to save? How are they going to evaluate that? I mean, for example, horrific, terrible flooding has recently happened in North Carolina due to Hurricane Helen coming through. And we're talking billions of dollars over the next 10 years to help that area recover. When we see these terrible events happen more frequently, like what are we going to do? The money and the resources will run out. You know, we are at the precipice right now. It really is just fascinating to read about. And he approaches it with such a compassionate mindset. He's not like super judgy of these people, but he also stands up to what he believes is right. And he challenges them in certain situations when these things are being discussed or political things are being discussed. This book took place around the time of the original Trump election, and they were actually in the news at one point, which I didn't know about, but I'll let you read the book to figure that all out. And yeah, I think the author approaches it in a very humanistic way, and I deeply appreciated that. But he also, like, you can feel that he cares about them and wants to shake this reality into them that their island is not going to exist. I will say this won't be for every reader because it really delves into the minutia of their day-to-day life. I don't know if every reader will find that fascinating. I did, especially when looking at the overarching theme of this nonfiction work. So yeah, I would recommend this as well. Very good. The next book I'm going to talk about is The Kaiju Preservation Society by John Scalzi. This story follows a man who is let go from his corporate job and has to become a food delivery driver in the midst of COVID-19. But this actually leads him to meet someone who offers him a job with what he calls an animal conservation group. What our protagonist Jamie finds out is that he is actually going to be entering into like an alternative dimension, second Earth type situation where these creatures called kaiju exist. But the barrier between our world and this alternative world is very thin. So they have to not only like maintain the population, take care of them, but make sure that they don't breach. I think this is what one would describe as like a quintessential beach read. I thought this book was kind of going to talk more about the ethical dilemma of the sacrifices required for scientific progression, right? And it kind of does, like, but it's very surface level. It's an author's note in the back, and he talks about how he wrote this during lockdown, and he was writing another very serious book, and he just needed like a reprieve, and this just came from him. One criticism I do have of it is that some of the humor, and listen, I am a millennial, I am in my 30s, but it was very millennial humor. Not cringy, but just didn't hit for me. The best way that I could describe this book, going in, I thought my experience was going to be like watching Jaws, but really it was like watching The Meg. And if you've seen those two films, you'll get it. It was light, it was fun, it was breezy, you know. Next up, we are going to be talking about a self-published book, and that is Whispers of the Deep by Emma Hamm. Now listen, was it on my 2024 bingo card that I would be picking up a monster romance? Now, this story follows Mira, and Mira is a headstrong and defiant engineer that works on Beta, which is an underwater city, and she meets Argus, and he is a brooding merman who hates the Acromos, which are the humans, who he believes are destroying the ocean, and he is setting out on a plot to destroy their city. We get it, enemies to lovers, right? Romance, it's 400 pages, but it kept me engaged. This was actually written better than I anticipated, being a self-published monster romance. I didn't really know what to expect. The narrative was good. Like I said, it kept me entertained, and the romance was steamy. When else am I gonna read a merman and guys, I can't. Guys, I can't. Okay, listen, I'm only human, okay? Guys, I can't with this. I liked it. And that's all I'll say about that. And the last books that I'm going to talk about in this portion of the wrap up, All the Stars and Teeth duology. This is by Adeline Grace. Story follows Amora, and she is the queen of Visita, which is a series of islands that create one kingdom. And on each island, they have their own individual magic system. But her island, because she's the princess, has soul magic, which is kind of the darkest, most exclusive magic only for royal bloodlines. She has a test that she must complete to kind of prove that she's worthy of carrying this magic. And of course, something goes awry, and then she goes on a quest with a very mysterious pirate, kind of understands not only the source of her magic, but how the magic system exists in her kingdom. It was fun, guys. I have to say, I wasn't disappointed, but I did kind of expect a little bit more. I thought the ending was very strong, but there were some issues with the writing. We end book 1 and the characters are in one place. And then we enter into book 2 and it seems like this entirely different experience has happened in a very short time frame between book 1 and book 2. Like everyone's perspectives have changed, everyone's acting different. I think it just messed with the continuity of the story. It's a YA book series, right? So the narrator's very young, it reads young, escapism, you know? So yeah, I don't know if I'd recommend these, but I would not recommend them. I just think they probably weren't for me necessarily. So, okay guys, that is the end of part 1. Stay tuned for part 2. I promise I will be back. And we will talk about more summer books in October. Lots of fun. I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye.